Hello, everyone. It's Rita McGrath here. You probably knew that. Back for another Thought Sparks podcast. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the show this week Karla Trotman, who is the president and CEO of one of the largest contract electronics manufacturers in the country, and I believe the largest run by a person of color. So that's exciting. She's got a new book out which details her journey. It's called Dark, Dirty, and Dangerous: Building the Vibrant Future of Manufacturing. And given how much manufacturing is in the conversation right now, I cannot think of a more timely topic. So, Karla, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to be here. So this is a family business. You're the second generation, is that correct?
I am, yes.
Okay, so maybe start with that story, just how the business grew up and how you came to be familiar with it. And you've got some fascinating stories in here about the process of succeeding your dad, which I think are just really fascinating. So tell us the story.
Absolutely. My parents, both college educated, working in corporate America. My father at the time was running a instrumentation division of a company where they were doing blood analyzing equipment. So he was designing it, overseeing the manufacturing of the software and writing the software for the equipment. And ultimately, the company was acquired. And like with most acquisitions, they sometimes look and see what they can do to cut costs. And so they cut instrumentation. While he was home, he found somebody reached out to him and said, "Hey, manufacturing, I have these cables that need to be built." And he built these cables on the kitchen table. And the guy said, "These are great. Can you build more?" And ultimately, what started on the kitchen table is the company that I have today. So it wasn't that they started out with the concept of let's be entrepreneurs. It was just solving an issue in the short term until my father was finding his next big job, let's say.
Mm-hmm. So it was a bit of an accident.
Yes. Yeah. But with most children who have family businesses in their lives, they don't want to ever take over a family business because it's not a glamorous upstart that we see and hear about all the time in mainstream media. And what I saw was, my mom working full time, my dad trying to make this business happen that went from the kitchen table to the garage and ultimately into an incubator space. And it just was not what school has programmed us to believe to be true, which is get a good education, go to a good college, and get another great education and go off into the world, corporate America, and fight each other for the C-suite. And and so that's what I did. I went that direction. I have a background in, I have a degree in business logistics and an MBA. And I really wanted that job. I don't know why I wanted the C-suite. I think I was just told that.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was working in corporate America, I had really difficult pregnancies and it wound up starting a business out of a need. It was an e-commerce site to help women such as myself, because at the time you couldn't buy everything on Amazon or have it delivered to you. You literally had to go to a store or reach out to a boutique.
Oh, horrors.
Yes, right? Can you recall that time? Yeah. So this was like an e-commerce site in the beginning when there weren't many. And I ran that company for 8.5 years and was overlaid with the time period of when Amazon has created this 2-day delivery concept that no one ever thought about. And so the one thing that you as a business owner don't want to deal with is an angry, uncomfortable pregnant woman because she's expecting her things in 2 days. So after 8 years, I just, I didn't want to do what I needed to do in order to keep the business going because I was still working full time. But I realized there was an opportunity, and that was to take everything that I had learned with doing business online with inbound marketing and translate it to my family's business. And that's when I saw how small business is such a great way to create generational wealth. And I decided to take over the family business.
Wow. But that wasn't without a fair amount of drama, as I read in the book. So originally, I guess your dad wanted to split it between the three of you. Is that correct? You and your brothers?
Yes. I have 2 younger brothers, and I think that's every parent's dream. You've created something, you want your entire family to be able to glean everything that you have built. And I mean, you think about it, what else can you do? You can't, my friend Nicole says, she used to say to me, you can't leave my job to my kids. And she's right. But building a business, you can leave to your family. There's not, I can't think of any other thing that you can grow outside of finances, but like all of your relationships, that second mortgage on the house, everything that you've put into it, and be able to transition it to the next generation like a business. And in theory, it sounds great, but when you really look at what needs to happen for a transition of wealth from one gen to the next, it's not easy.
No.
There's so many issues, such as, you go to a bank, the bank is going to want to run everyone's credit. So how do all of your relatives that you're going to take over this business, what does their credit look like? A lot of them may not have assets because you will leverage that if you're getting the bank loan. There's issues of education. Everyone's not educated in the same way or has the same aptitude, which would have worked out because everyone can take a different area of the business in a sense. But when I looked at it and I realized how much I was going to have to bring to the table in comparison to everyone else, I just really didn't feel that it was going to be a fair exchange. And after a while, we brought in a third party to assess us and to really show my family, this is the person that should run the family business. And ultimately, I became the one. And that was interesting. A lot of people ask if there were fights or disagreements, and I would say no. I think one brother realized that he didn't have the assets and whatnot needed. The other felt that it was more of a sense of duty that he would show up. And so it kind of worked out in the end. But I think that being able to say to my family, like, I'm not willing to do that. I don't know many people that are able to say that to their family.
Well, I think having difficult conversations like that, where you really have to come from a place of pretty brutal honesty. I mean, a lot of people shy away from those conversations. They just, they end up regretting it, right? On the program a little while ago, I had Robert Pazin, who is currently the CEO of Radio Flyer.
Oh yeah, I know him.
He's so fun. He's so fun. He's just so fun. But he was saying that if he had not had the passion for the business that he had, that it would not have been wise for him to have taken over from his father, because everything sort of stems from that. And if you don't really want to do it, I think that's not where your heart lies. It's just like a life sentence, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think working in corporate America at one point, and also just the family conversations that we've had around business, is that when you take on a body of work, for example, in a corporate setting or in your company, you charge enough that if you know that it's going to be a lot of friction, that you charge enough to make yourself not hate yourself for taking it.
Right.
So
I thought clients that that would go right into that bucket.
Yes. So when my dad and I were talking about it, I said, I will never take on something that will cause me to hate myself. And me running everything and then writing a check over to my brothers for 66.6% every year would cause me to hate myself.
And how did he respond to that?
I think after thinking about it for a while, he's like, you're right. That's not fair. And, when you have advisors, they're able to tell you how you can even it out on the other side with other assets. In a sense, I'm working for an inheritance and paying it off through bank loans. I just happen to be able to benefit from it now. And if I burn it to the ground, there it goes, right? So, there's pros and there's cons to that.
And one of the things I understand that you do now is you're helping other companies kind of deal with, there are predictable issues in a family transition, right? I mean, it almost always takes longer than everybody thinks it will. I gather your dad dragged his feet for a little while, and that kind of thing. But then managing it successfully does then result in a generational wealth transfer, which is, when it works, it can be a beautiful thing.
Exactly. I think that being able to talk to someone in the same generation you were in or in the position that you've been in is very helpful as opposed to just talking to advisors.
Mhm.
And in many cases, my father and I would talk to other families who were in the transition process. And there's conversations that the previous generation will have with each other that they won't share with the next generation. Because really, you're talking about mortality. You're talking about what are you going to do with this phase, or their usefulness in a business, which is not their usefulness. It's just sometimes you need to make that transition while you're able to help each other. So I felt as though I had almost like presidential training wheels in a sense, having my father and I work side by side with one another.
Mhm.
And that was an amazing blessing because when he was able to willfully walk away, he was fine with it because we had worked together. I've had friends who've taken over family businesses because a parent has passed away. So after going through the whole probate process and spending a lot of money, there's so many questions that they have that sometimes they're not able to hold on to the business, which is horrible when you consider your family's life work.
Exactly.
Um, or they've not been able, there are questions that they had that they couldn't um, answer, or there's secrets and things that they couldn't know that weren't. I mean, some of the things and stories that I've heard is all because people aren't willing to put a plan in place and they're not willing to have the conversation and move forward. So we really, for me, it's really about wealth transfer
Mhm.
in a sense that it's about taking care of your employees who are there for your family through your business. And it's just really, really good common sense to try to figure out what the next step is, especially when you have an entity like a family business.
Absolutely. So, did you face challenges as a young woman in particular, or was just the transition between generations the bigger deal?
I think that so it's there's not many people that look like my family in this work that we do. And part of that is like I said, my dad kind of fell into this business. Who didn't decide to go into it willfully, I would say. And my community of people are people that have corporate jobs and they're in the C-suite. I don't know a tremendous number of business owners. I definitely did not know a lot of people of color who had businesses. And so when it came to having those types of conversations or even knowing where resources were, um, there's no one really you can go to. And so my issue was more so of feeling very isolated and trying to go out and now make friendships, relationships across manufacturing. Thankfully, my father had a number being the company's been in the same area. And so name recognition has been helpful. But really building as a woman in this industry, it's different. Even when I join organizations like Women in Manufacturing, a lot of women aren't the owners of the business. They work in the manufacturing industry, so a lot of the decisions that I have to make around the company, think not to say that the men have not been tremendous help, but for me, I had young children and my husband had a corporate job, and being able to balance those things. I couldn't really go to a lot of men to talk about that. There are conferences that I probably should have attended and could not because there were duties that I had at home. And it's not that we don't have an equitable marriage. It's just my husband's a corporate attorney, so he doesn't have the flexibility that I have to
Right.
leave. And those things were hard. And then even just having the places where I go and the people that I would hang out with, our conversations are very different. They're not about growing a manufacturing company. And so when you put together all that time, a lot of and you compare it to others in your cohort within your industry, you don't have a lot of time spent in that industry. So now that my children are older, I'm able to adjust, but I think that a lot of things would have become easier had I had that network. But the way that my life was designed, it just didn't fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that from more than one, woman that finds herself as the only or one of a few, or you're not sort of part of the old boys club. It can be very lonely and very
Mhm.
isolating. At the same time, there's a lot of decisions you can make, I imagine, that are easier if you're not sort of caught up in this network of everybody knows everybody. And
Mhm.
if you make a decision that maybe isn't positive for someone, that now there's a whole community kind of glaring at you. So I think it has a little bit of pluses and minuses. So let's talk about this theme throughout your book of you're very upfront in the title of what manufacturing is thought of
Mhm.
as dark, dirty, dangerous, manual. I'll throw a lot of adjectives at it. But your argument is it doesn't. Well, it's not, and that actually having that thought out there in the world is kind of a strategic negative. But that manufacturing today is nothing like that. So maybe tell that story.
Absolutely. I think that we've done manufacturing a huge disservice by not really opening our doors and explaining exactly what it is. Really, it's taking something from its like nascent state and creating it into something else. And in my industry partnership locally, we have companies that are bakers. There's people who do woodwork and cabinetry. There's companies that like myself that do electronics manufacturing, and we've created events around manufacturing to show young people what it is, but it's still not enough to attract a number of people to come into it. So we've always dealt with huge labor shortages in manufacturing. And I think part of that is because I think it was around in the 60s when everyone decided, like the initial thought of sending work outside of the country to take advantage of the larger margins due to lower wages. And in shipping everything overseas and taking advantage of a global supply chain, what we ultimately did was send everything out. Like that was a huge economic engine for our country. And now we're in a place where we've made other countries rich off of the very thing that we need right now and that we needed. Partially because we take a look at during COVID and when supply chains were shut down, we relied so heavily on this tight supply chain across the world that we didn't build into those plans contingencies that what if the world shut down, which it did. And it put us in a very awful situation. So my goal in this book was really to try to explain to people how important manufacturing is, that it's so many things. It covers so many areas where you can have a GED through a PhD and be in the industry and be very successful, and that it's very much needed all over again. We need people to see what it is. We need to market it better, and really change the thought of what people have in their mind. Because oftentimes they're thinking of those old reels of people leaving a dark and sooty factory with their lunch pail, and that's really not what it is. It's usually right now they're very quiet and clean environments. People are listening to music or they're listening to podcasts, and I'm thinking more so of my facility. And a number of them have been with us for over 15 years and have really gone on to raise their families and send them off to college. And it's just like any other job. But one of the things we did on a local level all throughout the country is really change the way that we pay attention to the trades. And young students who want to further their education are now using those trade schools to help themselves look better for colleges. So when I visit trade schools, they're not just doing work so that they can and learning how to do blue collar work. Many of them are trying to create an edge for themselves. And so now these schools, now that we have a need for people in the trades, are at capacity. And we're trying to find ways to build capacity in manufacturing, but also to attract people at the same time. So it's quite difficult right now for us. But right now, it's definitely a marketing issue.
Mm-hmm. That's just so interesting. And I think it's what you're talking about is really part of a larger trend. Like I remember when I was in high school, the girls all had home economics and the boys all had shop class.
Mhm.
And shop class just kind of over time disappeared. And what's now starting to happen is schools are saying, hang on, not everybody needs or wants to go to college. Not everybody is going to be benefit from that. No, we're not all wired the same way. And there are stories now about kids in high school getting guaranteed offers for $70,000 and up jobs doing welding and plumbing and, you name it. Because a lot of those jobs actually are quite skilled and it takes time to learn them. There's a lot of tacit knowledge involved.
Absolutely.
And the robots can't really take over.
Right. That's very true. Though sometimes I wish a robot could take over.
Well, what was Henry Ford's old line? Why is it when I just want a pair of hands, there's a brain that comes with it?
Right. Right. But as a mother of two teenagers, 17 and 19, because I'm in this like industry, it's easier for me as a parent to say, look, you're either going to go to college, you're going to go to trade school and learn a trade, or you're going to go into the military. Like you're leaving this house regardless. And I think but most parents will say, you're going to college, you're going to college.
Mhm.
And we need to change that narrative because it's not for everyone. And it wasn't until recently where we have seen in the news that college graduates are having a very difficult time finding employment and they have, 6 figures in debt that they're not able to cover. And
Mhm.
so now, whereas earlier in my career, when I returned to the family business, where it was really difficult to have those conversations, where we would have these manufacturing festivals locally to show young people what manufacturing is. They would go home and say, I want to go into manufacturing. And parents were like, no way, you're going to college.
Mhm.
Now the parents are thinking this might definitely be something you should think about. So we're seeing a little bit of the parents coming to their senses a bit and, seeing a little bit of a renaissance in manufacturing.
That's interesting. And do you think that we'll be able to create that kind of robust cadre of talent for the manufacturing sectors?
Well, that's the hope. Right now, I believe it's the Army. They have, watch it be the Navy. Let's just say it's an armed forces branch. They definitely are looking at the supply chain and realizing that we don't have enough people in manufacturing to produce the next gen of submarines. So they've created a campaign, buildsubmarines.com, and it talks about the amazing work that you can do within manufacturing. So it's not something that people aren't paying attention to. I think now I think there's many levels to it. First is the awareness level to let folks know, hey, we exist. And then there's the education piece of it. And so I think we're trying to peel back the onion so that people really understand what it is that we're asking for them to do, what the options are, what the pathways look like. And then people like myself talking to folks and talking to young people about the options that they have outside of college. I think that's the only way we can attract them now. It's because we definitely lost a generation of people in the skilled trades because we had outsourced everything and those people saw their jobs disappear. And as I've heard said many times, generations aren't made, they're created. And so those generation that lost their jobs are telling their children, do not go into skilled trades because of what it had done to them, because they had lost their jobs. And so that's how we have an influx of people that go to college. And now we're saying, don't go to college because you're not going to be able to get a job. And so now the pendulum is swinging back the other way. Now, I think we overcorrect, obviously, when we say those types of things. But I think what we need to really talk about is the options for the young person, what is available to them and what they feel drawn toward. And they don't feel drawn to anything unless they are exposed to it. So right now we're in the exposure phase.
That's fascinating. And so are you creating communities of other people trying to generate a manufacturing renaissance?
Yes, there's through I guess it's workforce development, definitely through Philadelphia Workforce Development. They have industry partnerships. And right now we have the Southeastern Pennsylvania Manufacturing Alliance, which is one of many partnerships within the state of Pennsylvania. I'm in the Philadelphia region. What we do is we meet. We are a non-competitive partnership that talks about the issues that we are having as manufacturers in the region, because we drive workforce, and we give them the feedback so then they can push that back to the schools. And we for years have talked about being able to find people in manufacturing. We created, I guess, the career pathways. We've created training programs for people who want to have some type of a boot camp intro to manufacturing. We've gotten funding for that. We have skills training. So the goal right now is, how do we amplify that? We have a couple of cohorts and we graduate 15, 20 people. Now you have 80 companies fighting over 15 people. It just doesn't work. So right. And so how do we now fund and educate the people that are interested in that? And so that's a battle that we're currently forging.
Super interesting. Well, of course, right now in the midst of talk about, tariffs and what's the new world order going to look like and where is stuff going to get made, it's a particularly timely topic. So if you're just joining us, my guest this week is Karla Trotman, author of a very cool book which aims to reposition manufacturing in people's minds as not a dark, dirty, dangerous place, but building the vibrant future of manufacturing. And it's both a great business book and a very personal book, too, as she describes her background as a woman of color trying to take over a company and run it effectively. And it's a really, really interesting read. It's also not super, super long, which I appreciate. So,
Me too.
So one of the things that intrigues me is when you think about the sort of population that goes into occupations like manufacturing, is that many other countries have a very robust apprenticeship system. So Germany would come to mind, where you come to a point in your education and development where you can pick, and if you want to be an accountant or something, then you go off and you do university. And if you decide you want to work with your hands, there's a perfectly legitimate, totally socially accepted path to that. And the jobs pay well and they're respected. And I think for a while in manufacturing, we had this sort of, I don't know what I would call it. It sort of fell out of being glamorous, right? It was seen as less, I don't know, less powerful, perhaps, less engaging than the sort of knowledge work that kind of took over. And yet what I see when I visit the advanced manufacturing plants is they're unbelievably sophisticated in many cases.
Yes, very much so. I would agree with you. I think what we've done when we shipped everything overseas and away from the US was we've abandoned an entire industry, whereas we probably should have looked at ways to reinvigorate and retool. And I think oftentimes when, that definitely wasn't thought out well at all. I think what we need right now is, again, to really show how many, so for example, electronics manufacturing, which is what I do. It is one of those areas of advanced manufacturing that is changing as the world changes, from being able to do the next generation of AI chips to chiplets, to being able to use automation, to use augmented reality to train people so that they can build things. It's one of those careers where you have a tangible product at the end of putting in that knowledge. The folks that work for me are technicians. They are people that troubleshoot and figure out problems. They're looking at blueprints and schematics and trying to take someone's idea and to bring it into fruition. And those are jobs that just really don't exist in the knowledge economy. And I think that there's something very fulfilling that a lot of the people that leave here have said, that they feel that they're contributing to the defense of the country, to helping supply chains, to helping industry. And it's something that is not yet highlighted. And in other industries of manufacturing, whether they are creating solutions for homes within, like closet organization, for example, is one of the businesses in our partnership. We have another company that's doing pharmaceutical manufacturing, and the variety across the field is definitely something that could attract people.
Mhm.
Again, with anything, if you don't have access, if you don't have the ability to see what it is, you're not going to be drawn to it. So the hope is that we can attract people across various fields into manufacturing. I don't, for example, physically make anything. I'm still doing the various business functions that I've done throughout corporate America. The difference is that I see the work that we do and what it's going into and how it's changing lives. So there's an area of fulfillment that we've not yet communicated, and I hope that we're able to do as we try to fill these jobs and as we try to encourage the next generation.
I love that. One of the things that I've been observing, and it's not good, is so many workers don't feel a sense of accomplishment. They
Hmm.
don't feel engaged. They're in this sort of rote jobs where they don't feel connected to anything. And what you're describing to me sounds like a real antidote to a lot of that sort of corporate ennui that we're facing, workers who just sort of pretend to work and they're not really enthusiastic, they're not really engaged, they're not putting their whole soul into it. And what we know about human motivation is the shortest version of it, which was popularized by Dan Pink, is we value autonomy. So having control over our work, we value having an ability to determine how we do things. We value mastery, which is the chance to grow and to develop and to become better than we were, every day. And then we value a sense of purpose, really having a vision for where we fit in. And so many of these kind of knowledge work, service jobs just don't seem to have that sense of meaning that at the end of the day, being able to step back and say, see that, I made that, it's just a really different thing.
It is. It is different. I know one thing that I tried to do coming in was really change the way our office worked.
Mhm.
So my father coming up in an age where, it was more, I would say he would used to say it was a joke. The beatings will continue until morale improves. And that was the, the thought that was manufacturing. It's awful, right? And yet, in my lifetime, it's really about enjoying your work, coming in, a sense of fulfillment. So, as I started doing research and how can I really change and turn the page and turn the corner, I wanted to create an environment where I enjoyed being there because I knew my people enjoyed coming. The research showed that a lot of future of work studies are just primarily done on white collar jobs. So there's not a lot of data on that. So what we started doing was introducing surveys such as the Gallup Q12 to find out how our employees were feeling. I took the time to talk to them and ask them, like, why do you like coming here or what do you not like? And to try to create that environment for them where they felt heard, they felt appreciated. Um, and it wasn't just like the work or the money, because it was beyond those things. Did they feel safe here? Did they feel that they were cared about? And what we wound up doing was bringing in an organizational psychologist. At the same time, we changed our core values, our mission, and how, it wasn't a dramatic shift. It was just that they were more so stated. And in doing so and bringing in the organizational psychologist, it really helped change the energy of the company. And so, with the absence of not having the research, I did my own and leaned into those answers that we had gotten. And I think we're really headed towards a different place. People are still trying to like rid themselves of poor habits of thinking that they don't really have a say. And really, what I'm looking for is for us to try to solve some of the workplace issues internally.
Mhm.
And I go to my partnership and share with them how we've been experimenting so that the entire region and the entire partnership, we can all benefit from growing our individual companies.
Oh, I love that. I think that's great. And it must be great to have peers that you can sort of, hey, we tried this and it really worked. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things
Absolutely.
I'm super curious about is, uh, so I recently wrote a book, well, not that recently, my most recent book is around how do you see around corners? And a big part of that is, the things that are going to change your business, they're going to be important. I mean, they don't present themselves like a wrapped package in the, the conference table at corporate headquarters. They're out in the field, they're where the front lines meeting the workers and everything. I'd love to know your personal approaches to how do you make sure you're plugged into what's going on out there?
I love that you asked that because usually the the road is just very clear to me sometimes. I'm able to, because of all the networks that I'm now plugged
Mhm.
into and what we do well and what I would love for us to do better. Um, I'm able to try to find alignment, but I will tell you, this first quarter of the year, I decided that I was going to do nothing. We do our regular work, but as far as trying to figure out the direction that we're headed in, because I was not clear. I knew that the tariffs were coming. I knew that we would have supply chain disruption. I knew that it was going to take, the people are going to take a morale hit. And I really needed to figure out, how do I just survive in this? And when you're dealing with trying to survive, it's really hard to think about the future. And I spoke, thankfully, I have a great board of advisors, but I also have people that I can tap into when I feel very, very stuck in the moment. And they can go a little deeper and they're at a higher level with this. And um, they helped me realize that my process really for trying to figure out what to do in the future is that I try a lot of things at the same time that make sense. So I know that aerospace, for example, in defense, is going to become a really important part of the industry, specifically in electronics. So I lean into people that I know that are consulting in that space and ask them, what's on the horizon? What are these companies that are being bought? What is the technology that they're doing? And I try to see how my company can align with that technology. What certifications do we need in order to be a player in that? So we're not trying to so our differentiator is that we're not, the reason why we don't compete with Asia is because we're not doing cell phones, high volume electronics manufacturing. We're doing high mix, lower volume. So people that really care about IP, or they're selling a customized solution, such as in industrial and defense applications. So when I'm looking at the next phase of defense or the next phase of industrial and the revolution that's going through with manufacturing, I need to make sure that we're aligned with what those this future casting people are seeing. And so a lot of that is spending a lot of time reading, listening to podcasts, going to conferences, having conversations, and really thinking like, what makes sense? If for this to be true, this has to happen.
Mhm.
And I tried to plan out multiple steps ahead. And in doing that, it made me see like, okay, we need to do an acquisition, which we did. Okay, well, now we need to do another one, and it should be in this area. And then, build it out from there. Am I always right? No. Am I right a lot of the time? Yeah, but I think, it's enough, right? Um, but a lot of times as manufacturers or as business owners, we tend to stay in our office with our head down and let business happen. But, as we've seen with many companies, if you are not spending time looking at what's happening next, you're going to lose your company.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I really try to be mindful of spending time thinking about what's the next direction. So, as I said, the first quarter, I was kind of more concerned, like, how are we going to maintain the company? I still have those thoughts of how we're going to maintain, but I had those thoughts during COVID. I've had it during the interest rates issues, the supply chain. It's just a constant.
Mhm.
But with thinking about where the direction of the company is headed, I really do try to think about certifications, the types of people, the budgets we want to deal with, the company targets, and what doesn't work out when I'm trying out multiple things at the same time, I kick that one to the side and invite something else in and try to work on what makes sense, what's working, what's giving us a good runway.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I wish more leaders had that mindset, because a lot of them, as you said, they're in their offices talking to the other members of the C-suite. They're not really out there finding out what's happening. So I understand your company, in the time that you've been associated with it, had to really embed digital and more and more kind of what digital technologies were. Um, was that hard? Was it easy? Did you have to bring in new kinds of people?
It was hard and easy at the same time. Easy because you have to change, so it's easy to make those decisions. The integration part is always the pain, and switching from old school manufacturing. I mean, we were running Windows XP on one of the servers. I mean, it was just we needed so many upgrades. It was a huge investment, but we also knew that we needed to be better as a company. So one of the things we do, because we do defense work, is there is a cybersecurity model that we have to be certified to. So that meant bringing in some type of security cameras. Now, security cameras aren't just a camera, they also are able to monitor people using AI. And how do we integrate that into our system? There's areas of the way that we do time. We sell time as a business. We tell a company, we can build this for you. It's going to cost X dollars. That number is determined by the material and the time. So for the fact that my people need to have accurate accounting of their time, how do we become more accurate? How do we cut down in, how their efficiency needs to be strong? How do we make that easy? Okay, we had to introduce tablets to everyone. Okay, everyone has a tablet. Everyone doesn't have English as a first language. Thankfully, the tablets also are able to be in different languages. Well, the people who have English as a second language want to learn English, so they don't want it in their primary language. And so, there's little ancillary things that come whenever you're trying to automate, whenever you try to utilize technology. The goal for us is to try to make it comfortable enough for everyone so that we have good data integrity. Once the data is great, the next level is integration of AI to be able to not just use trailing indicators of how we've done as a business, but really to be able to have predictive indicators to show us how we're doing, what companies give us the best margins, what product lines are our best margins, where do we need training, because we see that there's a lag in time with this particular person when they work on this particular project. And those are, with everything becoming more and more expensive, we need to figure out how to get a better margin. And not only through technology and automation are we able to do that, because people are expensive, materials are going up, and all the customers want you to lower the price.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a huge conundrum. Have you ever had to make what you consider a bet the company decision?
I'm sorry, a bet?
A bet the company, a big commitment that was irreversible.
Yeah. I feel like I always do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think one of the bets, and anytime I think about buying a business, it's a bet, because as much as you could do all the due diligence in the world and there still be a landmine, there's whenever you have a really great customer and they decide they want to give you more and more business, and then going from less than 20% of your top line revenue, they jump to 40% in a year.
Scary. Yeah.
That's very scary as well. But you take the bet because you want to make the money. You want to be a successful business. You want to keep people employed and give them bonuses. And it's everything is a bet. Whenever you are faced with a decision that could be very expensive, and it take up a lot of your line of credit, because they want to pay you in that 90 days as opposed to, something more reasonable. That's a bet, because you're hoping that they're going to be able to pay you on time. And now across the entire country, or probably the world, payments have slowed down. As you see, AR has increased dramatically. And, the money situation, it's difficult. So then again, you have to increase price to take advantage of the fact that they have to pay for that money. Otherwise, you're giving them a loan, a business loan, and that is a risk and a bet. So if I put all the risks that I take on, you have to be crazy to be an entrepreneur, quite honestly, because everything is a bet. And I think one of the discussions I had with one of my younger brothers at one point, he said to me, like, all you care about is money. And I think because if you don't understand that everything is at a cost, everything is a math calculation. If I have to lay someone off, it's because the math is telling me that I can't afford to have the number of people working for me that I have. And so I did say to him, he took it differently than I meant it. I said, well, you don't really have $5 in the business to even understand why I think about money. Like, I have a lot of things on the line. And it really comes down to the fact that it's like, I'm in business, not in charity. The goal is to make money. And in the end, everything's a risk.
Mm-hmm. I have a wonderful friend who's an entrepreneur, and we had him do a what we call a personal kind of statement leadership. We call it a leadership credo, and he had to act it out in front of this class of other executives as though he was announcing how he would lead to a group of new employees. And so he gets up and writes the word profit on a flip chart, and he said, profit, that's what I care about. And you can count on me to really, really care about that. But then he went on to tell this wonderful story about how he'd grown up in England in this town that was, local businesses, fairly profitable. They did really well. And then one of these sort of tsunamis of globalization swept through, all those businesses closed. And he said, around me, I saw my neighbors getting their mortgages thrown away. I saw people having to leave. He said, and so we don't build a business that can produce profits. We don't have a claim to anything else. And the whole room kind of went, oh, we never saw it that way before. It was so interesting.
Yeah. I think that is one of the things that we talk about. I really, with my management team, we had a meeting today, our management review, which is part of ISO 9001 2015. You have to have these meetings. And during the meeting, it was a discussion about a light fixture. And they said, oh, can we buy a light fixture to put over this area? And I said, no, I don't want to spend the money. And they said, well, why not? I said, because we're getting new light fixtures. I don't want to throw it away in 3 months. Let's move one that we're not using over. And then there was a discussion on a rollout. I'm rolling out a plan because I really believe that men and women should be paid the same. So that was one of the things that I'd come in. One of my big things is really about equity. And we created a stair-step model where we pay based on skill. So the individual controls how much they make. It's not subjective. And so I said, have we rolled out this plan finally? We've done everyone's review. When are we doing this? And they said, well, you didn't want to buy a light fixture. You're going to have to, pay people more money for their skills. And I had to explain to them, I don't mind investing in people. But I do mind throwing money away. Right. So one is a long-term strategy and the other is not. It's just a Band-Aid on a situation. And I think oftentimes people don't understand perspective. They think it's just as simple as you don't want to spend money. Right. But really trying to get them to understand why I make decisions the way that I do is almost like creating my own large language model for my staff so that eventually they can start making decisions as I would.
It'll be Karla GPT.
Yeah. I mean,
let's talk about equity and inclusion, because it is shocking to me how quickly just the whole thing just went upside down after, a good many years of people saying, yeah, this is not only the right thing to do, but it's also good for business and it's good for our customers. It's good for, it's good for the economy. And everybody seems to be too afraid to even talk about it now, which is very, what is it about treating people equally and fairly that's so difficult to grasp? I find myself to be somewhat baffled by this.
Yeah, I think it's really the definition of what you think. There's DEI and then there's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think people think they're two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, so in the work that I do, I don't, because it's so specialized, it's not that I even use these specific doors to go in because the business is just so specialized. However, I do have a lot of friends that are DEI consultants, and they're people who have done very well as a business because of their minority or woman owned or whatever set aside designation they had. The reason why, and they're very qualified. The reason why they were able to get the job is because a wider net was cast. And that's really what we're talking about. We're not saying pick someone because they are a person of color or because they're a woman. The thought is that you're not even looking for these people. You're going to the networks that you're used to going to. And if men have always been in power, they're going to always go to the networks that they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, reptilian brain. We always tend to go toward comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity, equity, inclusion is about inclusiveness of all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why it's become vilified. But like most definitions, a lot of people think they're totally different meanings than what they really stand for.
In many cases, yeah, in many cases. There was some really interesting research that was done on exactly what you said, broadening the supply base.
Mm-hmm.
There was, I think it was Massport, the big Massachusetts-based sort of port transportation infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And they just simply said, look, we just want to see that you're going, some percentage of your suppliers had to be different than the ones you normally send RFPs to and stuff. And that alone increased the diversity of their supply chain, increased its resilience, brought more people into the fold, all kinds of good stuff. And it wasn't that anybody went out and said, I'm going to take somebody unqualified and offer them work. It wasn't that at all. It was, as you said, it was broadening the number of people who were able to even conceive of bidding on that work.
Yeah, I think I see it with boards that I sit on. When my ideas or when I speak up, my ideas are vastly different than what everyone else is saying because I have a different lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to tell an educational institution that I believe that their criteria for example, an alumni award disqualifies a lot of people of color because of the unfair lending and unfair, I guess it's see, I don't use private equity or anything like that, but unfair awarding of private equity dollars of startup capital for diverse businesses. So if you're going to compare a diverse business that hasn't made more than $1 million and has been operating for 3 years versus a company that has, completed a seed round of funding, they're on very two different playing fields.
Mm-hmm.
And that is unfair. And the discussion that came from that allowed people to say, oh, I never really thought about it that way. It's like, because you've never been on the other side of it, which is why you need people to be able to be on your blind spots
Mm-hmm.
and be able to identify how you can create a solution that makes everyone feel that they are in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Or from a business perspective, that's how companies have been able to see different avenues and market to different communities. I mean, let's face it, outside of the United States is 75% of a marketplace. So if we're only looking at the community that we're used to selling to or being a part of, or that makes sense to us, you lose out on market share from a global perspective. So any business that wants to sell to other people that don't look like them, they are going to need the ideas and the lived experiences of people who don't look like them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some fascinating work that was done by my colleague Kathy Phillips, late Kathy Phillips, unfortunately. And what she did was she would take a creative problem-solving task. And the trouble with real life is you never have the counterfactual. You never know what would have happened had you made this other choice. But in a research lab, you can actually measure how well teams do on creative problem-solving tasks. So we should have diverse teams and homogenous teams complete these tasks. And here was the interesting finding that has just stuck with me ever since. So the homogenous teams got done faster, felt great about it. They got right to work. They were like, we all spoke the same language. It was so easy. It was great. We really were great. Mm-hmm. And the diverse groups, on the other hand, were like, oh, wow, it took so much effort. I didn't know where she was coming from. It took us like half an hour to even define what the outcome we were trying. Just blah, 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 blah. But here's the interesting thing. The diverse groups almost uniformly performed way better on the creative problem solving tasks than the homogenous groups did.
Yeah.
But they felt worse about it. So if you sort of look at a wall with pictures of the leaders of American enterprise, and you say to yourself, do they feel good about what they're doing, or maybe they do?
But I to that point, and I'd love to hear, see that research. We'll talk about it later. But when I work in a group where, again, people don't look like me, and I have this unique lived experience, there are times that I'm fighting so hard for that view to be seen that I've left meetings feeling like I have been in a wrestling match, mm-hmm. because everyone thinks they're right. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so, of course, you want to be seen, you want to be heard. And I believe that if you're going to really diversify a group and really get different lived experiences, you need more than one. Right. And so I feel like I don't want to be the diverse voice.
Right. The research backs you up. So there was a study that was done of candidates for board nominations. And this particular study was looking at gender diversity, not racial diversity. But what they found was that when you had a single female candidate, she was orders of magnitude less likely to get the nod for the role than if you had at least two. And if you had at least three out of a slate of, call it 5 or 6 people, their chances went way up. And the reason is actually a very interesting psychological thing, which is if you have a candidate that's perceived as an outlier, mm-hmm. they are inherently perceived as the riskier choice.
Right.
So if you have at least 2 or 3, then it's not seen as that strange or abnormal. So the research actually backs you up on that. You need at least 2.
Well, I love it. I mean, I look at my own staff. Half of everyone that works here, like half are of color, half are not, half are women, half are men, and then there's people who don't, well, I don't know if there's a lot of people that don't identify as either. And, I love it. Mm-hmm. I love that people feel comfortable being here, mm-hmm. and that they feel comfortable speaking their own language and feeling like there's a sense of community. They're not being forced to be something else. And I think that growing up the way that I did, and I'm very sensitive to that, of people making gross assumptions about me. And so it's easy for me having that experience to say, when people say, oh, well, they don't speak English. And I'm like, yeah, they speak one more language than I do. I think that's kind of amazing, because their English is better than my Vietnamese. So part of it to me is I feel that when you can come to work as your true and real self, you're not stressed out. You're not being a professional actor or actress, and that you make better connections, you make better decisions, and you're healthier. Mm-hmm. And so that's also another important piece for me within the workplace that I'm trying to create.
I love that. So one of my projects at the moment is I'm working on an idea, which is, I'm calling it the permissionless organization. And what that means is creating companies where you can push decision-making as close to the edges, as close to the customers, as close to the suppliers as you can, which is what prompted my question for you earlier of how do you kind of get out there and see what's going on the horizon? Because it's not obvious, and it's easy just to go to your office and work through emails all day long. but I find that kind of creates these blind spots that you were talking about. So I think the social architecture is so important.
It is. And that, that's where also the diversity comes in. I don't just go to manufacturers to get answers. I talk to people in advertising. I talk to people who are in videography, people that are in security. Like how are you solving these problems in your company?
Love that.
And the perspective is, do we always get the right answer? No, but do we always help one another? Yes, all the time. And if it's not that, it's a connection or a resource that I didn't have access to.
Mhm.
So there is a bit of getting outside of the office that is really, really important. My father would tease me when I would go somewhere, and he's like, "Oh, it sounds like you're going to another boondoggle." And I'm like, "No, it's called networking. There's a presentation." And every time I go, the goal is I need to learn something, connect to somebody. Like, I put work behind it. I don't wait for things to happen to me. I'm researching who's going to be there, what connection I think is important to make. Um, if I don't get something out of a presentation that I thought I would, I go and ask more questions. So it's to be naturally curious and to also work to not just feel like the answer is going to come to you, or that the magical contract is going to land in your inbox or at your front door. Oftentimes it really is getting on the plane, going to that city, sitting through the presentation, talking to the people to have better understanding. um, I'll tell you, in doing so, I had a really difficult problem with a defense contract once, and we were not being paid, and it was a lot of money, like to the point where I couldn't really sleep. And I went to a conference in the defense sector and started speaking to people who support small businesses in this area. And I got the most clear answer from them. And within 2 weeks, I was paid, because what I was looking for was a solution to a problem that was just ongoing. I didn't know who to talk to in the area. I had gone up and down the entire corporate organization. No one could get anything done. But really, part of what the job is of leading a company is going after those unique answers. It's going after, or it's solving problems from a different perspective.
Mhm.
Um, and it's something that, I tell people. I think it was something that I read when I was in graduate school. It was a book, and I wish I could remember the title, but I remember that the two gentlemen were talking, and one said, a lot of people want to be president, but not a lot of people want to do president. Doing the president thing is going after the answers when no one in your organization is able to find them. It's making sure that you keep the company afloat and you keep them going in the right direction. And it does not happen just sitting at the desk.
Absolutely. Well, it has been such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit and hear your perspective. Where would people go who'd like to learn more about manufacturing, about you, your company, the sector? The book, as I mentioned, is Dark, Dirty, Dangerous, Building the Vibrant Future of Manufacturing. And we've got a passionate advocate for manufacturing here. How would people learn more?
They can go to karlatrotman.com as well as electrosoftinc.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and the book is available where books are sold all over online.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, thank you so much. I hope we get to talk again.
I do too. Thanks for having me.